The following is a metaphysical approach to the field of consciousness, as represented on the chart in front of you. In order to properly understand this work, it's necessary to consider a few points. First of all, to accept the law of karma. And by karma, we refer to action and reaction, the law of cause and effect, or as the Bible refers to it, as you sow, so shall you reap. Secondly, the theory of reincarnation and or re-embodiment, and they are not the same. The soul, the spirit, the higher self, the conscious self, and the basic self are the component parts of our journey upon the earth. None of us are native to the earth planet. We feel that there is intelligent life existing in all of the planets within our solar system. And the earth planet then is likened unto a school where we as soulic entities journey back and forth into the earth's experience of dual polarity, positive and negative polarity, for learning until such a time as the soul has learned all that it's required to learn. Now the soul is that provides the life, the energy. The spirit, however, is the motivator, the activator, that makes each one of us different and unique from the other. The higher self, the conscious self, and the basic self form the trinity of consciousness. The higher self exists 4 or 5 inches above our head. The conscious self, of course, is that level of consciousness that we are communicating with at this particular time. That we call the basic self within this school of thought is in reality the subconscious mind and or the subjective mind. It is important to understand that when conception takes place, it takes place in accordance with an exact plan. There are no accidents with regard to the act of conception. It takes place not only with given parents, but likewise at a precise time. The higher self, in conjunction with the master teacher, of which we all have, researched the Akashic record file, which is the book of life of each soulic entity. In other words, the history of the soul's journey upon the earth and perhaps in other systems as well. All that the soul, in its experience within a trinity of consciousness, has ever been through has been recorded in the Akashic record file, either as a positive accomplishment or that remains unfulfilled. The high self, in researching the Akashic record file then, along with the master teacher, ascertained those lessons that need to be programmed into the karmic pattern to be brought forward once conception and birth are accomplished. We, of course, within an outworking of the karmic law, get away with absolutely nothing. We must be held accountable for all things, and that is the purpose of life upon the planet. Now, within an understanding of the dual polarity, the positive and the negative aspect is that serves as a catalyst. That is negative brings forth the lessons that need to be placed upon our screen of understanding. In other words, that we might be able to master those qualities. The negative polarity, when it moves into the area of control, that is to say, control over another human being against that human being's free will, then it ceases to be just negative or catalytic and moves into the realm of evil. Thus we have then upon the planet the positive and the negative, or the good and evil polarities. We all have teachers. As I mentioned, the master teacher serves with the high self in the formulating of the karmic pattern. However, there are other teachers and guides. They are present whether we are aware of the world of spirit, continuity of life, or not. They do exist, and they subtly bring about the teachings that we, as soulic entities, need upon the earth. We embody, sometimes in a male form, other times as a female form, and the soul moves back and forth along with the basic self, or selves in the event there are two, a masculine and a feminine polarity, and the high self, until such a time as the lessons have been completed. The karmic pattern flows first to the high self, is released then by the high self down to the subjective level, and the subjective level, or what we call the basic self, then in turn, within its own free will, of which it has a great deal of, reflects that karmic lesson or pattern up to the consciousness, which is new each lifetime, in order that it might be worked out for the betterment of the soul's progress. The subconscious mind, or the basic self, enters from one of four kingdoms. The elemental kingdom, that is to say that such a basic self has evolved then up through the elemental kingdom, through the mineral, into the plant, into the animal form, and then into the human, animal-like body. Please understand that I'm not referring to the soul, for the soul has never been part of the lower kingdoms, nor will it. But I'm referring to the basic self. That is the elemental type basic self. The second type of basic self is the Davic type. We refer to that type of basic self that comes in from the world of nature, such as a wild bird, for instance. This type of basic self finds it very difficult in the initial stages to exist upon the earth planet, just like a wild bird would find itself confused, being caged. So it is with the Davic type basic self. They're very restless. The third type basic self is the outer spatial type, that type that comes in from other planetary systems for learning patterns upon or within the earth planet. And the fourth type of basic self then is the angelic type, that type of basic self that comes in for patterns of service. Now, most individuals have two basic selves, a masculine and a feminine, of one of those four categories that I've just mentioned. Perhaps one basic self or the other is on the periphery. They travel the pattern together and interact as is needed. The masculine basic self is one that has qualities of strength and will and determination, whereas the feminine type basic self has the qualities of love, warmth, emotion, and sensitivity. Now we find the basic selves then embodying into male bodies sometimes, female bodies sometimes, back and forth until such a time as each basic self has fully mastered the art of taking care of certain responsibilities that are given to them by the higher self. They are then the physical body, to take care of the physical body commensurate with the karmic pattern, because many physical afflictions, whether one is born with them or acquire them, are karmic in origin. The basic self has a responsibility then of taking care of the emotional structure, the emotional body, to keep the emotional body balanced. The third responsibility is to take care of the psychic doors or the chakras, to maintain protection for those doors, to keep those doors open to that is of wisdom that needs to flow in for the highest good of the individual, but by the same token to keep the doors closed to that is negative. The fourth responsibility is the intuition, to protect and to cultivate the intuitive faculty of the human being. And finally, the fifth responsibility is that of the memory pattern, to maintain the memory pattern, to allow that memory pattern to flow that comes in from prior embodiments as it is pertinent to whatever is going on within the individual's trinity of consciousness within a given lifetime, as well as bringing forward the memory pattern of the current embodiment. Now, it's very important to understand the free will that the basic self has. There are some schools of thought that feel the basic self, or the subconscious mind, is not an active mind, but rather a reactive mind, that it of its own free will has none. It has only the ability to receive that is programmed into it by the conscious mind. We, as a result of thousands and thousands of Three Selves evaluations, or insights into this field of consciousness, have found beyond doubt that the basic self has a tremendous amount of free will. In fact, the basic self has the ability through its free will to make or break the karmic pattern, to accept the karmic pattern or the law of karma, to accept the physical body of the individual, to accept or reject the high self, to accept, in fact, or reject the creative source. If a basic self, for some reason or another, in its learning process, decides to square off against a consciousness or a karmic pattern or an aspect of the karmic pattern, certainly that conscious human being and the physical body within is in trouble. So it's very important for us to understand that the basic self has a lot of free will that has been given to it, and for the most part they are willing to cooperate with the karmic pattern, oftentimes prodding consciousness to get with the program that the high self has set into motion. Should mention at this time that the higher self brings forth an individual within a particular plan for purpose, always to increase the awareness of the soul. Now, we as a conscious human being have the ability to create thought forms. We have the ability to create positive thought forms or negative thought forms. If we create positive thought forms, then for the most part, that is going to occur in our life patterns will be constructive and creative. However, within our own free will, we have the ability to create negative thought forms, and if we do so and continue to place energy behind those negative thought forms, we set into motion a chain reaction that will produce, depending upon the amount of energy that we place behind those negative thought forms, ultimately it will result in our creating an obsession. It has the ability to become so powerful that it can overshadow or encircle the subconscious mind or the basic self. Now, when this occurs, two things result. First of all, the karmic pattern in its flow is cut off at this point and not allowed to flow to the basic self. That means then that the basic self is not able to take care of its responsibilities, and several things begin to happen. First of all, the physical body begins to deteriorate. The emotional structure, which is out of balance to start with, in the creating of the obsession, becomes more and more imbalanced. The psychic doors, generally speaking, are unattended and are wide open, allowing outside entities to enter. The intuition is affected and the memory patterns affected. First, when not properly protected, make it possible for disincarnate entities, or what we call possessive entities, to enter through the psychic doors and lodge themselves between the divine mind, the high self, and the consciousness. When this occurs, it means then that the possessive entity takes over control of everything below it. Takes over control of the conscious mind, takes over control of the obsession and the subconscious mind, permitting then its own will to be carried out against perhaps the free will of the consciousness and or the basic self. Many crimes, for instance, are committed by possessive entities in charge of a consciousness that has little or no understanding of what is occurring. However, there is a chain of events that begin with the conscious mind's abdicating its responsibility in the sense that it created, through negative thought patterns to begin with, an obsession that allows the rest of this activity to occur. Most drug addicts and alcoholics are obsessed because of feelings of insecurity, inadequacy, and perhaps rejection, stemming back to the point of conception. And those patterns then develop into obsessions which ultimately lead to the alcoholic or the drug addict state. Possessions and obsessions can be part of curse-like actions, and curses are to be taken for real. They are not figments of the imagination. They can cause serious damage, and oftentimes are carried over from lifetime to lifetime, going back hundreds and thousands of years, brought forward into this particular life pattern to be worked out in order that the soul might gain from that awareness. I should like at this time to explain what occurs in the incidence of so-called sexual deviation. Our basic selves have been given the responsibility by the high self to enter and to express in certain ways. There are a period of lifetimes or embodiments in which the basic self is opposite to the sex of the body. When this occurs, it means then that basic self opposite to the sex of the body is in charge of usually the physical body and the emotional structure. Meaning then that in the case, let us say, of a male who has a feminine basic self, who has reached a high level of attainment in a feminine body in a prior time, having mastered the emotional structure in the physical body, suddenly then by the high self is thrust into the opposite type body, being a masculine body, and the stress is great, which in turn causes an imbalance in the emotional structure. Now, there perhaps are physical causes of this too, but nevertheless, the emotional stress is so great that it brings about a pattern of deviation. The opposite, of course, is true for the masculine basic self that enters into a feminine body and, of course, does not handle the emotional structure of the female physical body in a proper fashion. At the time of transition, the following occurs. The conscious mind ceases to exist, returning back into the elements of the earth. There's no continuity with the conscious mind. It is likened to the garments that we wear that ultimately return back to the elements of the earth. The basic self, of course, has continuity. It continues to exist in conjunction with and in service to the high self and the soul for lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. The basic self's natural form of evolution is to ultimately so perfect itself that it will then, at the end of the incarnation, not the embodiment, but the end of the incarnation, become a higher self, taking on a brand new basic self or set of basic selves that have been prepared very carefully by the spiritual hierarchy to enter into a trinity of consciousness, taking on a new soul. Now, the spirit, of course, returns on back to its own pool. The soul will return, if it's at the end of an embodiment, back to its home planet within this solar system. If it is at the end of an incarnation, it will then return back to its star quality or its point of origin as a soulic entity. In other words, where it was created. To just reiterate the difference then between reincarnation and re-embodiment, and those terms are used interchangeably, they shouldn't be. Remember that we incarnate into a master pattern that has many, perhaps thousands, perhaps millions of embodiments, sometimes as male, sometimes as female. This experience is to give the soul an opportunity to evolve. Think of the soul as a gem. As a result of many polishings, a gem becomes a beautiful and even more beautiful gem. So it is with the soul. It's important also to remember that there is no such thing as the dark night of the soul. The soul is never part during a living embodiment of any negative or evil experience that the individual is going through. It is only at the time of transition, when the positive lessons that have been learned by the basic self and the consciousness are added to the wisdom of the high self and made a part of the awareness of the soul, which means, of course, increasing its light and its awareness. Those negative experiences, or let us say those experiences that have been unbalanced or unfulfilled throughout the course of an embodiment, return with the basic self or selves back to the repository in the inner planes by the higher self into a new embodiment, perhaps as a male, perhaps as a female, until such a time then as all of the lessons have been learned for the benefit of the soul. Now, in the conclusion of this work, it's important for us to understand that we take the basic self through a series of experiences, oftentimes drawing upon the memory pattern of prior times. We take the conscious mind's conscious problems, attempting to bring some understanding for why certain things have occurred, and then we bring forth the higher self's attitude toward what has occurred throughout the course of the karmic pattern. So therefore we bring forth the basic self and or selves, in the event there are two, interviewing each one in order to find out how they are handling the responsibilities attributed to them. If there are two basic selves, then they're going to share these responsibilities. Usually the physical body and the emotional structure is handled by one, and the so-called wisdom area handled by the other one. And if you'll recall, I've said that the basic selves must go back and forth until such a time as they're capable of handling all of these responsibilities equally within a male or female body. So the purpose then of the Three Selves work is to bring about an understanding so that the individual might in turn have that is necessary in order to move on into the future, placing aside those patterns as a result of the understanding that has been gained that no longer have any power or any energy over the basic selves or the consciousness. Thus we seek to bring about an integration between the three levels of consciousness. The consciousness, the basic consciousness, reaching together in unified form up to the higher self, deep balance and understanding. This is the special work of the fellowship. It is very unique. It is a work that was conceived by Dr. Bella Carish and myself in 1961, has been brought forward in time, having served thousands and thousands of people within its concept. Through Bella Carish functioning as the instrument, both the basic self and the high self is brought forward and interviewed, and that's what makes this unique work possible.